tiny homes. They're super cute. People have many different uses for them, but there's lots of things that people don't consider when they're purchasing one. Whether you're buying a small manufactured home, an RV park model, a yurt, an earth ship, there's a million different types of tiny homes that you could be considering, but you don't want to make these big mistakes. So today we're going to be talking about the 5 biggest mistakes when it comes to tiny homes, and that way you can save yourself a lot of this, because that's what you all want to do, is save a lot of this. The thing is, as much as we love tiny homes as the public, when it comes to the government and government officials, whether that's local or federal, they're not necessarily on board like the rest of us. Now, not all tiny homes are going to be affixed to a foundation. In many cases, and with many of my videos, I'm talking about the tiny homes that are affixed to a foundation. But in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit of both. So when I talk to people on the phone, the first thing I ask them, are you planning on putting this tiny home on a piece of land? Are you planning on traveling with it? Now, a lot of people, what they say is, well, I want to be able to travel with it, but I also want to be able to have it on a piece of land in the future. Here's the thing. If you're going to be looking for a tiny home that you can travel down the road with, make sure it's RV certified, because you're not going to be able to park that thing anywhere unless it has that RV certifications. Most parks aren't going to let you stay there for an extended period of time unless you have that. Now let's talk about when you're planning on keeping it in a more permanent residence for a period of time. So you have it on wheels and you're just wanting to drive it up to a piece of land and park it there. Now, a lot of city officials are not going to allow you to do that unless you have the proper hookups for that. They may consider it a campsite, but if they don't know where your sewage is going, they're going to be, absolutely not. And when it comes to composting toilets, because I know a lot of you are off the gridders, a lot of county officials are saying absolutely not. I know they're fine. I understand. But when you talk to local officials, they hear composting toilet and they think that there's going to be like poop laying around the road. They have no idea what a composting toilet does. And so they've already made ordinances that don't allow for that. So if you're planning on doing this and you have a piece of land, make sure that you've checked with the county officials in that area that you're going to be able to park your RV there and still be able to live in it. Now, sometimes I will allow you to park it on the land, but you can't live on it during that time, which kind of stinks. That kind of defeats the purpose. And in other cases, they'll let you stay on there, but you have to hook up to the city water and sewer, or at least have some kind of well system and sewer system on that piece of property. Now, if you plan on keeping it in a park, as long as they allow you to stay there for an extended period of time, that has nothing to worry about. I will say this, if you are looking at a park model RV, it does state in the statements that they have in all of their warranties that they're not meant for long-term living use. They're meant for like a vacation spot, like a camper per se. So just know that if you're planning on living there for like 10 years, they weren't designed necessarily to be lived in for 10 years. So now that we touched a little bit on land uses, let's talk about the laws in your specific area. When it comes to anything, any structure, doesn't matter if it's a shed, a barndominium, a tiny home, you have to get some kind of permitting to put that structure on that, especially if you're attaching it to land. Before I was talking about if you weren't going to attach it. If you're planning on putting a tiny home on a piece of land, it does not matter how small it is, you still need to get written permission or permitting in that specific area. Now, if it's a piece of land that you have inherited and it's been in your family for a gazillion years, that does not mean that you still have the right to do whatever you want. I know that sounds incredibly crazy because it belongs to your family and that you shouldn't have to ask for permission, but still you have to have the proper permits to be able to put any structure on any piece of land. Because nothing be worse is if you poured a concrete pad for your tiny home and you're about to put it together to find out that you didn't have it put in the right location because the setbacks for your property line weren't correct. And let's talk about that a little bit. If you have a piece of land that you've had for quite some time and you haven't had a survey done to it, you're going to need a proper survey done so that way you know exactly where you're allowed to put this tiny home in the first place. You must have the proper setbacks because you'll have some neighbor in that area that says, that's not in the right location, and I know. Somebody is always too nosy and is up in your grill and is willing to throw you under the bus in a heartbeat when it comes to anything unusual. I even saw this couple on TikTok.
Hi, if you're new here, we're building a shipping container house. Get out of the yard. Get out of our yard. I will be calling the police. Yes, it is. No, it does not.
They have acres of land in the middle of Missouri, and the neighbors are all over them because of their container homes. So don't think you're going to get away with it because like your family knows everybody in town or has been in your family forever and no one's going to bother you about it. Somebody will. Somebody always has something to say. So make sure all your T's are crossed and all your I's are dotted when it comes to putting any structure on a piece of land. Have that survey. Check with the permitting office. Make sure the local laws are being followed. And don't try to be sneaky and put in a composting toilet. They're going to find out. They always find out. So what's the best kind of land to own when it comes to putting in a tiny home? Well, I always tell people to look for something called rural tract, and that's going to have the least amount of restrictions when it comes to the piece of land itself. In many other areas, you're going to want to check with your local real estate professional and ask them what would be the best piece of land. Here in Louisiana, it'd be rural tract. In some other states, it might be agricultural, but you have to find out what their local laws are, and that real estate agent will be able to direct you. And my favorite piece of land when it comes to putting any structure on is one that's either A, had an old structure on it, like an old house on it, or even an old mobile home on it. If you look in the description, they'll say there's a structure on the property that's considered at no added value, meaning the house that's there is a piece of garbage and they don't want to take the time to either take it down or take it apart. It's just going to cost them more than they really want to put into it. That's actually a really good piece of land because the utilities have already been to that piece of land. So that to me is like a gold mine. You can find really good pieces of land that way. And then you know exactly where the house should be. And you have a good idea from just by looking at it. Whenever you're looking at a tract of land, also, you can always ask the sellers if they have a survey that's on file, no matter how old it is. That way you can have a general idea. I always recommend getting a new updated survey because, you know, some of those old surveys are not necessarily the best in the whole entire world, but at least it gives you a good idea of what you're working with. Now, if you're working with a real estate agent on this, they can also pull it out from old title work as well. Not all the time you're going to have a survey on file, but at least look for it. And just remember, because it's a piece of land doesn't mean you don't have an inspection period. When you're looking at a piece of dirt, you still have the right to inspect it. And that means you can have your surveys done if there hasn't been any surveys done. That means you can have any kind of perk tests that you want to have done on the piece of land and any other inspections, whether it's a timber inspection, soil test compaction. There's a million different tests that you could have done to that piece of land. Ask your real estate agent which things are going to be most prudent for the project that you're doing with your tiny home. Now, that brings me to my next point. What kind of tiny home are you thinking about buying? Let's talk about that a little bit. Not all tiny homes are created equal. If you live in the state of California, a lot of people refer to a tiny home as an ADU because they're using it as a structure behind their house in order to have like a rental unit. And it's called an auxiliary dwelling unit, an ADU. In most cases, if you're looking at this in California, and this is just for you Californians, you can't just go to any tiny home place and pick up a tiny home and throw it in your backyard and be able to get that permitted for an ADU. Make sure you work with somebody in the California area that can help you set that up and set it up correctly because they will make you tear it down. And there's all sorts of laws when it comes to ADUs in your backyard. And one of them is sprinklers and the right kind of sewage. So don't be silly. Just because you heard it's approved doesn't mean it's an easy process. I'll tell you who knows more about that than I do is my friend at How To ADU. If you're in California, go over to his channel and check it out because he has all the information when it comes to ADUs and your backyard and what you want to do with it. Now, for all my other people that are not in California, this is what I want you to do. When it comes to your tiny home, I want you to first think about your purpose of why you're purchasing the tiny home in the first place. Are you purchasing it because you are wanting to downsize? Or your kid that is going off to college but isn't really going off to college but wants some independence? There's a lot of us, me included. Not me personally, I'm not going off to college, but my kid is. Every tiny home that you're considering, write down all the pros and cons. If you're purchasing it with somebody else, make sure that they make a completely different list than you do in a different room. Don't have a discussion until both of you have made a list of what you want in your tiny home. So that way you can meet in the middle and there isn't any hardships in the long run. Now, I'll tell you, if you're thinking about buying a tiny home and you're going to dip into your 401k to do it, I wouldn't necessarily think that is the most wise financial decision on your part. But if this is the only way you can get an affordable house and that's the way you're going to have to do it, I understand there's always reasons to do this. But I would also look to see if there's any financing that you can get if you're buying a brand new tiny home. I'll warn you, a lot of times those interest rates are going to be sky high because they're mostly considered like personal loan and there can be as high as 10, 15, even 20%. depending on your credit. And if you're just trying to get out of the rental rat race and it would save you actually even more money than if you were renting, it all kind of makes sense. But you also need to consider is how much is going to cost you to maintain the tiny home. Even though there is a tiny house, that doesn't mean it doesn't have tiny problems. Even my client who actually turned a shed into a tiny home, she has now lived there almost 7 years, and she's had all sorts of different things that come up that you don't even think about. If you live in Texas, you know as well as I do, there's tons of hailstorms. So you're going to have a lot of damage that happens to your roof. Are you going to be able to replace those roofing materials easily? Do you have the financial means to do that? Over time, you're going to need to have to paint it. I mean, it's probably going to only take you 1 can of paint on the outside, but make sure you don't go cheap when you're going to replace that paint. And if your tiny home is made of wood, you may still have to worry about termite problems, especially here in Louisiana. We have termites like crazy. These are all things you're going to have to put in the back of your head so you can save money for the future. And don't think that just because you bought a brand new tiny home, you'll have nothing to worry about. Things happen all the time. And if you put it on wheels, there's things that can happen as you're going down the road. I mean, there's rocks that kick up and you can break your windows. The tires can go flat in your tiny home. There's numerous things that you add on top of it, especially if you're traveling with your tiny home down the road. And that brings me to my next point, insurance. Insurance when it comes to tiny homes is so difficult. You're going to have an easier time if you're having a tiny home that's on wheels because it's considered an RV. So you would get RV insurance and you can roll it into your policies you probably already have if you own a house already or you have some cars already. Now you're going to have a harder time if you're getting insurance on a tiny home that sits on a foundational pad because it is so small. Lloyd's of London is one of those companies that I've heard that does insure them. Somebody said Progressive has been insuring them, but again, it's going to be a little bit harder. And it may be so expensive that it's not even worth you trying to insure it. Me, myself, I'm too much of a panic freak. I couldn't live without insurance. Ooh, one more thing I was going to tell you about the financing part. This is one of those costly mistakes that a lot of people make. They think that they have to use the company that's selling the tiny home itself, their financing company. That may not be the case. If you have pretty good credit, you most likely will be able to go to your local bank or local credit union. You may be able to get financing through them and with a better interest rate. I would strongly suggest before you purchase a tiny home and you plan on putting it on a piece of property, look at other financing options other than just the people that are sitting on the lot. Their job is to sell you a tiny home and for them to push you to their financing. I want you to save as much money as possible. So if you can get it financed somewhere else through your local credit union and save yourself a ton of money, that's what I want you to do. So look there before you sign on the dotted line at the tiny home company. Now, another costly mistake that people make when they're purchasing a tiny home is they do not consider where they're purchasing it from and where they're deciding to put it. If you're buying a tiny home in, let's just say, middle of Texas, and then you happen to live in Maine, that tiny home may have been designed and insulated for that specific weather in Texas. So you're going to go ahead and bring it up to Maine, where it goes below zero quite often. And now that tiny home is literally an icebox. It's nothing more than a shed by the time you get it up to Maine. Ask them specifically if this is designed to be going all over the United States, just not Texas. If you can have it in Oregon when there's a snow load of 8 feet. So that way this tiny home isn't collapsing on you and your family when you decide to move into it. I know for some of you that might sound absolutely crazy to you, but not all tiny homes are built the same, and they're not built to the same exact standards that you would need for every single state. So make sure that you understand exactly what type of tiny home you're getting and if it can handle the weather elements in your specific area. So I have this idea for me and my husband, and I want to get your opinion. But I want to buy a plot of land and put a tiny home on one side for me, a tiny home on one side for him, and then have a tiny home in the center with a kitchen and a living room area. The poor guy needs a break from me because I am pretty obnoxious. So what do you think about that idea? Let me know in the comments section below. I do have some great information when it comes to tiny homes and modular homes and different types of affordable housing options. So you're going to want to check out these videos right here. My name is Kristina Smallhorn, your real estate whisperer, and I tell you all this because good real estate information matters.